Welcome to Dog Life Radio.
Hey everybody, this is Rossi Jujo, your host of Dog Life Radio. Thank you very much for joining. We have got ourselves another fantastic guest, a really good conversation teed up once again this week. The hits keep on coming. Let's see, so this week what we've got all set for you in just a little bit, we've got Sarah Ashman. Who is Sarah, you ask? That's a great question. Sarah's just another person that I bumped into in the virtual world of everywhere, cyberspace. Bumped into her. She's a registered dietitian, clinical nutritionist and dietitian out in Kansas City, also associated with Kansas City Barbell Club out there. We had the opportunity to get together and talk. We jumped into probiotics, prebiotics, but it really got pulled back and we went into overall gut health and just how the body is working. So it gets a bit clinical, but she's a clinical nutritionist, so that's kind of natural. It was really educational. It was a great conversation. We took a little bit of a small deviation here and there. We bobbed and weaved around food, nutrition, diet, exercise. You're going to learn. You may actually hear my dogs in the background, but that's just the way I roll. They were bouncing around behind me when I was talking with Sarah. It was a fantastic conversation, and we even get into the two different ways a baby comes out of a belly. Yeah, it really, I'm not sure how we got there with gut health, but we did. And I know I learned something there, so hopefully you will too. So with that, we'll just pause here for the podcast that you should be listening to before we just turn it on and release the hounds of that conversation. So this week, we're going to say, this is an obvious one, but I want to make sure everybody heard it. Joe Rogan, 1169 with Elon Musk. I mean, really, you should be listening to Joe all the time anyway, but I do know he puts out a lot of content and his stuff can get really long. Once you start getting to that 2 to 3 hour marker, that's a lot of content, but this one is really worth it for 1,000 different reasons. So it's 1169, episode 1169 of the Joe Rogan Experience. That is the podcast you should be listening to this week, of course, besides this one. So with that, we're just going to take a moment to take a pause for the cause, and then we will get going with Sarah Ashman. Hey, thanks for supporting the show. Remember to follow me on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube, all at Dog Life Radio. Help me spread the good word, too, so share the links on whatever social media you prefer. Subscribe to the podcast on iTunes or follow it on Podbean, Stitcher, Google Play, Overcast, or wherever you're listening. So throw up a 4-star or 4-cloud or whatever. Thank you very much. It's the best way to help others find the podcast. And as always, send me any feedback. I would love to hear from you. dogliferadio@yahoo.com. On with the show. All right, we are live and recording. This is Rossi Jujo with Dog Life Radio with a very special guest, Sarah Ashman, all the way from Kansas City. Thank you so much for taking time out of your day to join us.
Hi, yeah, thanks Rossi for having me. I'm super excited to be here.
Great. So this is so cool. It's funny. I usually start off with just a little bit of background about a person, which is kind of like the norm. But the thing that's interesting about our kind of virtual bumping into each other or virtual networking was we have a common acquaintance friend, Jason Leonards, had introduced us virtually, and because of that, I got the chance to talk with you. So I'm really excited about it. And again, I marvel at the positive outcomes of social media.
Yeah. Oh, I'm one of those people that I feel like social media is a complete curse because it's such a time suck. And how many times do you sit down and you're like, oh my God, I got to message that person back. And then 45 minutes later, you're knee deep in memes and you're like, where did my day go? So, but it's amazing as a tool for networking and finding people. I can't even tell you how many times somebody's been like, hey, do you know somebody who does this? And I'm like, oh yeah, let me connect you with that person. And it works out perfectly. It's like the perfect pairing. So yeah, I'm super excited that he was able to connect us.
Yeah, it is. It's pretty amazing. And so just to jump in, Sarah, you are a registered dietitian, clinical nutritionist, and Jason kind of was saying any types of questions that I may have in that realm, we could have a great conversation about.
Oh yeah, that's my bread and butter.
All right, cool. Well, so I think we had exchanged a couple of emails or messages. One of the things I wanted to talk about was prebiotics and probiotics, because I know that I hear a lot about it. You can't really listen to too many health and wellness podcasts or articles or read articles without something coming up about the benefits of these two things. So I wanted to kind of do a from the ground up approach of, what they are and, what we use them for, the signs that you may need them, and then we can jump into all kinds of conversations of where you can have them.
Yeah, totally. So before I answer that, I'm going to give you a little bit of background, the context on me, so that whoever's listening understands the sort of, I guess, angle, my experience with this, so where that comes from.
Absolutely.
So I kind of thought I would be a traditional dietitian, and like work with people in hospitals, and help them eat better and that kind of stuff. And I quickly found while I was interning that I didn't really enjoy that. And I ended up in the laboratory world, maybe just by chance. And this is the second lab that I've worked for. The company I work for is actually based in Silicon Valley, and it's called Vibrant America. And we do standard lab testing, like if you go to your doctor and you want to have a CBC or a lipid panel run, we do that kind of stuff. But then we also have this proprietary microchip platform that our founder came from Intel, had worked on the Pentium project, took that technology and applied it to the laboratory diagnostic world. And it is incredibly powerful at anything protein-based. And so for people who aren't real familiar or you don't really remember biology like 101 back in high school, proteins are basically just sequences of amino acids, and things that are protein based would be like DNA and RNA, but also antibodies, immunoglobulins, so like the body's defenses against something. So our test platform is perfect for looking at the microbiome when we test for the DNA of microbes. So that's sort of where I was explaining that. We do a lot of microbiome testing, and it's really fascinating, and I've gotten to see some really, really cool things over the last few years working with this company. Things that research says something should happen, yet lab results don't play out that way, right? And so that's where like we can quote studies all day long that say probiotics and prebiotics should do this, but then when you start looking at individuals' lab tests, we don't see that happen all the time. And so there's always this sort of category of people, and I'll give this caveat for what I'm getting ready to talk about. There's always going to be this category of people that do not respond the same way or the way that they should to probiotics and prebiotics. And the reason is we all have, slight, if not big, differences in our gut microbiome. And our microbiome is sort of that collection of microscopic organisms that reside in our gut. It's not just bacteria. We do have some yeast, as well as occasionally some parasites and some viruses every once in a while. So that's sort of my experience, is actually getting to apply what the research says and looking at these test results and interpreting them. What I started out doing there was helping doctors understand them, because that's not something they learn in medical school. And so helping them understand how to read the lab results, what they mean, and then how to treat the patient. A lot of times it's not something you can just throw antibiotics at. It's something that requires some pretty significant lifestyle and diet changes. So we'll get into all that. But so my experience is both sort of on the theoretical side when it comes to like looking at the research, but then also on the hands-on side, actually getting people's lab results to change when it comes to the microbiome.
Wow.
So probiotics probiotics and prebiotics are this like $1 million industry, right?
Absolutely.
And if you could tap into it, you are guaranteed a quick buck if you've got something gimmicky that you can market and convince people they need. I mean, it's one of those hot things like detox teas and shake diets and that kind of stuff, right? Weight loss pills. It's one of those things that's going to be around for a while. And it's really cool. It's one of those things that despite all of the products on the market, science doesn't actually know that much about the microbiome compared to what we could know about it. So keep that in mind, that most of the research that's been done up until the last 5 to 10 years was all done primarily in animals, because we didn't really have the technology to sequence the microbiome, let alone figure out what it actually meant for humans. And so the studies that have come out in the last, I would say in the last 5 years, we've had some pretty significant findings in terms of human microbiome studies. It's all really theoretical. So it's sort of like we see that this bacteria has an association with this disease, but we don't know if it causes it or prevents it, or it's a chicken or an egg situation, right?
Yep.
We know it's likely that the bacterial, what we call dysbiosis just means an imbalance of the bacteria, right? Either too many bad, not enough good, or a combination of the two. Dysbiosis precipitates disease in most cases. So the microbiome becomes imbalanced first, and then we get chronic health problems. And it's been linked to everything at this point. I think we've seen studies in humans now that have linked it to cardiovascular disease, rheumatoid arthritis, Hashimoto's, thyroiditis, all other autoimmune conditions, neurological problems, liver disease, diabetes. You name it, stuff outside the gut. It's not too far of a leap to go, oh yeah, there's a connection with celiac and Crohn's and IBS and IBD, because those are diseases of the digestive tract. But now we're finding that there's actually microbes that directly impact all these other things, which is cool. But then, the question is, well, what do we do about it, right? So probiotics are one of those suggested interventions, like, oh, well, we could just take these good bacteria, put them in a pill, and swallow them, and everything's good. And in theory, it's a great plan. And for some people who have just sort of mild symptoms, it seems to help a lot. However, some people who are really sick, who have all these very, more severe or advanced chronic diseases, probiotics, they get billed as this solution or cure-all, and they're really not, because those people have a lot of things wrong with them. By the point that you are starting to display these pretty severe symptoms, it shows up on your lab work, your blood work that you do, right? You go to your doctor and you've got all these symptoms and things wrong, and you actually have a disease diagnosis. Usually at that point, probiotics alone are not going to solve your problem. It's going to be very multifactorial. So, as far as general health, probiotics are probably not that harmful. Most of them. There's actually been a few studies that show that some of the products, or actually a lot of the products out there on the shelf, don't actually have in them what they say they do. And that's a combination of, maybe the company that put it out didn't do very good research, and whatever strain of bacteria they put into it is not really what's in it. Maybe they just didn't thoroughly screen it, or maybe it's not packaged correctly and the bacteria are not viable, which means at one point they were alive, but they've died since then, and so what you're taking is basically just dead, and it's not going to do anything for you. And then there's the whole do they come along with prebiotics? Does that help them survive better? So the supplement industry, I'm hesitant to say everybody needs to take a probiotic, or that probiotics can be great for everyone, because they're, I could go buy 10 probiotics and you could go buy 10 probiotics, and we're going to get completely different results taking each one of them.
So yeah, you were mentioning that earlier when you were saying how the whole microbiome of the gut in itself, each person's is obviously, well, maybe not obviously, but it's obviously very different. And then it seems like the reactions or results of these, if you supplement with probiotics would be different as well. And one of the questions that I kept getting and seeing on tons of different groups and so forth was surrounding the supplement piece about going how to know which ones to go with, which ones in terms of pills, and there's some that are in refrigerators, and there's all different types of sources. And then to the other point of going, what about dosages? So I wanted to make sure I had to ask you about the sources where you can get a pill, or you can go into the refrigerator at your local Whole Foods or your natural holistic type of a mart, and you can find different types of probiotics there as well.
Yeah. So, I mean, I know everybody wants this really easy answer of like, oh, we'll just take this. But unfortunately, we don't have that answer. When I still do a little bit of a private practice, primarily sports nutrition and digestive disorders, and there's significant overlap between those. There's a lot of athletes who have like IBS and IBD and things like that, surprisingly. So before I recommend a probiotic, if I ever do, and there's a lot of times where I just don't, I test their microbiome. That's the only way to know for sure what kind of probiotic is going to be best for you. There are some situations where a probiotic would make somebody worse. There's certain digestive disorders that a probiotic would actually make them more symptomatic, believe it or not, just because they have too much bacteria in the wrong place and you're just putting more in. So I can't really say there's an easy way to know. There's a number of those like at home, direct to consumer microbiome tests you can get now. And the problem with those is that first of all, they're not designed for anything clinical. They're more just like informational for the consumer to compare their microbiome to what they call healthy cohorts, which just means the average population of the U.S. Mm-hmm. And that's not really going to tell you what probiotic to take. And it's a little bit harder to extrapolate that information. As far as like products, right? Like let's say that you're just going to go get a probiotic. The whole refrigerated versus non-refrigerated, the CFUs, colony forming units, that's like the dose, right? Or how many live organisms are in there. It turns out that based on the research, that may not matter that much. It has more to do with how it's packaged and what types of bacteria are in it, and as well as what you eat with it. So, for instance, if you take a probiotic with a meal, the primary concern with these probiotic supplements is that your stomach acid is designed to kill bacteria. That's one of the functions that it serves. In addition to breaking down protein, a very, very low pH, so a very acidic environment, also kills microbes. And so when you eat food, you put protein, carbs, and fat into hydrochloric acid, the pH actually rises a little bit. So it becomes a little bit more hospitable to bacteria. So there's a better chance of your probiotic supplement surviving that environment, if that makes sense, if you take it with a meal. Now, it then has to survive the very basic environment in the small intestine, because you immediately, as soon as food releases into the duodenum, which is the upper part of the small intestine, you release bile and digestive enzymes, and so the pH, pretty rapidly rises back up to basic because it neutralizes the acid, and that's also bad for microbes. So there's quite a few barriers in the way of these microbes surviving digestion and making it into the large intestine, where they're actually supposed to sort of, provide benefit. Apart from taking it with a meal, some other things to look for is your supplement enteric coated. Enteric coating basically just means that there's a protective coating that does not break down in stomach acid, that will start to break down towards the end of the small intestine as food, what's left of your food passes into the large intestine. That's where the enteric coating would essentially be gone. So those microbes then can make it to the large intestine mostly alive and intact and do a little bit more benefit for you. As far as, what to take, that highly depends on what your problems are. So a lot of the newer research is focused on specific strains of bacteria and how they impart benefit for diseases, and that could be Like if you have celiac or Crohn's or ulcerative colitis, Lactobacillus plantarum, for instance, is one species that's been shown to be really beneficial for those conditions. One of the things that I take into account when I'm giving advice and doing a clinical workup for somebody is actually their history. So when you said kind of obviously we all have a little bit different microbiome, and in some cases a lot different microbiome. That microbiome is shaped mostly in the first few years of our life, and then throughout childhood and adolescence, it should stay relatively stable. However, our modern life is so awful, like absolutely awful, for keeping this microbiome healthy. A couple hundred years ago, when people were constantly exposed to dirty surroundings and lots of different bacteria and things like that, we were very diverse. We had this really diverse exposure, and our immune systems were stronger for it. And part of that is because we had a very diverse microbiome. The microbes that live in our gut are where our immune system gets its signals. Those microbes, to a large extent, tell our immune system whether or not to react or not react to things. And so when we don't acquire certain microbes, because we live in a very sanitized environment, for instance, we have a depressed immune system, and we're more likely, this is even studies have sort of started to show this, we're more likely to get asthma, autoimmune diseases, autism, and allergies, the big 4 A's, right? Those are more prevalent in individuals who don't have lots of diverse exposure in childhood. So it starts from birth. Whether or not you're born vaginally or cesarean, you get totally different microbial exposures if you think about it. Whether or not you're
really?
breastfed, formula fed,
That's pretty. I mean, that's pretty amazing. Just thinking, I'm the common person, I'm the layman, and I'm thinking when you're born, you're coming from the same person, and in terms of your birth path, if you will, if you go one way or the other, that's amazing that you can have vastly different, microbiome experience.
Well, and it kind of makes sense if you think about it. I mean, we can dive into the biology of the vagina if you want, but on a very basic level, the vaginal microbiome is predominantly populated by lactobacilli, which are they're considered a commensal or very beneficial bacteria. Women, so if there's any women listening that have ever had things like bacterial vaginosis, or yeast infections, what typically those come from is they lack enough of these lactobacilli to keep a healthy balance. And it's very similar to having a gut microbiome imbalance. A vaginal microbiome imbalance is exactly the same thing. You're lacking the right bacteria. So babies that are born vaginally are exposed to that bacteria. It gets on their skin, into their mouth. I know we don't want to think about this, but that's where they acquire their first microbes. And if they're not born vaginally, so they're born cesarean, right? They're pulled, there's a big incision, they're pulled out of their mother's uterus through the stomach. They actually are colonized first by bacteria on the outside of her skin, which tend to be more Streptococcus, Staphylococcus, some of your not so friendly microbes. And so they don't pick up that early lactobacillus right away, which it turns out is pretty critical for some babies, especially if they have some risk. So you can't control that, obviously. You have no control over that. And then you also don't have any control over whether or not you were breastfed or formula fed. Breast milk is really high in bifidobacterium, which is that second, incredibly critical exposure that should happen in infancy. Bifidobacterium makes up to 90% of an infant's gut microbiome, and it is even into adulthood, as it doesn't make up much of our microbiome anymore, like 5 to 10% at most. Bifidobacterium is one of those groups that when we are lacking it, we are really bad off. We get lots and lots of chronic inflammatory diseases. Our inflammatory symptoms in the gut are terrible. Without bifidobacterium, that's kind of one of those things that we're noticing that humans are doing things now that are kind of wiping it out. And one of those things is antibiotics. And again, most of us don't have any control over the fact that our parents gave us antibiotics in childhood.
Yep.
And as an adult, we still have to take them. And in no way am I saying don't ever take antibiotics, but we use them too much. We use them for things that they're really not designed for. You don't need them for a cold or a flu. They're actually not effective against those because those are viral anyway. But we take them for everything now. Like, little Tommy has the sniffles and mommy immediately runs him to urgent care and demands antibiotics, and they give it to her to get her out of the office. Well, little Tommy's more likely to grow up with allergies and asthma, et cetera, because he's wiping out all those good bacteria every single time he takes those.
I had made a note based off of something that you had said earlier about antibiotics, and I wanted to go down this exact path about the impact on the gut, because that's what generally, not generally, but sometimes when you go to the doctor and they do prescribe you with one of those things, sometimes you end up getting the advice to make sure that they take something else to help restore them afterwards, which is kind of counterintuitive if they didn't need it in the first place.
Right. So, I think the messaging really should be that, first of all, and I know some amazing doctors out there that won't overprescribe antibiotics. When that patient shows up demanding something, they're like, no, first of all, it's not effective against this. And second of all, by the time I give it to you and you fill it and you start to take it, you're going to be feeling better already anyway, because colds and flus don't last that long. And it's more of a placebo effect at that time. Mm-hmm. But yeah, so if you do have to take them, let's say that you do have something like you get a staph infection on your skin, right? That happens, and you should absolutely take antibiotics if that's the case, because you don't want that to become septic. Take a probiotic with it. And then this is sort of where we can't really say everyone taking this probiotic or taking this antibiotic should take this probiotic, because again, everybody's so different. We don't know what your individual situation and history and exposure is, but most of the time, a good quality probiotic, multi-strain, especially something containing bifidobacterium, is going to be really beneficial, because bifidobacterium is one of those that we lose and it never really fully recovers. From what we've seen in research, it doesn't 100% come back from where it was before you took the antibiotic. So every time you take an antibiotic, you knock it down a little bit more. And, by the time you make it to adulthood, we've got people walking around with like none. And if that's a bad situation. And those are the people who are really sick and symptomatic, and nobody can figure out what's wrong with them. They've got all kinds of chronic diseases, and they never quite seem to get better. And giving them bifidobacterium is not necessarily what's going to solve their problem, but it's certainly part of what they need. There are other things they have to do, obviously, too.
So when you were saying that, not that everybody shouldn't go out and take them, but some of those key attributes that you were just mentioning. Now, what types of signs would somebody start to see to know that it is working and it is effective, versus potentially trying a probiotic that for one of 100 different reasons just is not working for them?
Right. So, if we're just going off of like subjective symptoms, so how do I feel or what do I notice that's different? That's going to vary by person. Most of the time, people are taking probiotics because they have digestive symptoms. So diarrhea, constipation, bloating, cramping, nausea, those types of things, right? And if you notice a change in your bowel movements, so I, obviously talking about the microbiome and digestive health, I talk about poop all the time.
I expected this to happen, and I was prepared for the poop talk, and that's what we're talking about here.
and there's nothing wrong. Like, you should, if you don't talk about, like, at least with your doctor or healthcare professional, talk about your poop. You're missing an opportunity to, like, it's a pretty important health indicator. I would strongly recommend that, like, if you haven't paid attention, and everybody kind of knows their pattern, right? We all kind of know that we tend to, like, in the morning, I have a bowel movement about 30 minutes after I eat, or maybe I'm an afternoon person where around 2 or 3 o'clock I'm in the bathroom at work every single day, or maybe it's like 7 times a day. It doesn't, we all kind of know our pattern. Your pattern, an ideal pattern, should be a minimum of 1, but ideally 2 or more bowel movements per day that are easy to pass. So they shouldn't be really hard. You shouldn't have to strain. They should be firm, though, so they shouldn't be watery or loose or anything like that. And, not weirdly colored unless you're taking certain things that would change the color, and that could vary by supplement. But typically they shouldn't be green. or yellow, brownish in color. And, that's sort of what should be ideal. Now, our hydration status impacts that, the amount of fiber in our diet, our microbiome definitely does, nutrient absorption, our activity levels. Those of us who are sedentary tend to have fewer bowel movements. And we can get off on a soapbox about sedentary lifestyles. I'm sedentary. I went from owning a gym and being on my feet all day for probably 7 or 8 years to working at a desk. And man, I'll tell you, not only did I gain weight much more quickly, but like everything hurts and bowel movements changed. My sleep wasn't as good. I mean, this was like, it took me a while to realize that that was probably a pretty main factor. So there's all of these little lifestyle factors that play into things like bowel movements that we probably would not consider when it comes to bowel movement frequency and consistency. But what should change should be if you have a symptom that's abnormal. So let's say you previously had pretty normal bowel movements, but then you start having diarrhea. You should see the frequency and consistency of your stools change. So you should go less often if you're having diarrhea, because typically diarrhea is you're going too much and it's too watery and too soft. It should firm up. And it should return to normal. If it doesn't return to normal, the probiotic isn't really doing everything for you. It's kind of just a Band-Aid. And largely, I will say probiotics are kind of just Band-Aids for problems. They are not usually the solution to the true root cause of what your problems are. They're usually just kind of masking symptoms in most cases. Okay. However, it can change your quality of life. Like if you could go from having diarrhea to like mostly not having diarrhea, for somebody that's dealt with that, like I've worked with patients with, who have had IBS for 7, 8, 9 years, right? And we've been able to get them to have normal bowel movements more often than not. That in and of itself is valuable. So I don't want to take away the value of that. No,
absolutely. And as we're talking about this, it feels like if you're listening now and you're thinking you need to take one of these, take a probiotic. Part of your baseline assessment is to kind of understand how regular you are, kind of understanding, do you have any of these symptoms you were mentioning, in terms of feeling bloated, feeling, gassy, if you're pooping too much, pooping too little, whatever. It seems like some of the things you need to do is understand that, then also maybe assess what you're eating to see if there's any regular pattern there, because I would imagine that if you eat a certain way, whatever the type of diet it may be, if you deviate strongly from that, it can have a strong impact on your gut health, depending upon how large the deviant is.
Absolutely. And so that's where we get into the subject of prebiotics. So prebiotics are basically just food for probiotics. So it's fiber that bacteria will consume, and it increases the abundance of their population. So when you eat a certain type of fiber, it will feed a certain type of bacteria, so then you have more of that bacteria, and that bacteria, so I'll use the example of bifidobacteria because I mentioned that one before. They really feed on most fiber. So pretty much any type, there's quite a few types of fiber, but I'll use resistant starch as an example. Resistant starch is a type of fiber that does naturally occur in some foods. We can also make it, believe it or not. Cooking and cooling starch will create resistant starch. And resistant starch is called that because it has a certain molecular structure that our digestive enzymes cannot break down. It's not shaped the right way, so our enzymes can't latch on and start to pull it apart the way that it would regular starch. But our gut bacteria, bifidobacterium is one of them. There's quite a few that can do this. It can break it down because it has enzymes that do. And in doing so, this resistant starch, bacteria produce metabolites, and metabolites are basically just byproducts of prebiotics or fiber being broken down. And the majority of these metabolites are very beneficial. They either directly impact other bacteria or they directly impact the host, which is us, the human. One of those metabolites is short-chain fatty acids, and short-chain fatty acids are basically resistant starch and a few other types of fiber get broken down into this, and they are like a super fuel for our intestinal cells in the colon or large intestine. They also directly impact the signaling of immune cells. And so the more of these short chain fatty acids, in particular one called butyrate, which if you Google this, you can read all kinds of great things about butyrate and butyrate levels. Propionate and acetate are the other two that you'll run across as short chain fatty acids. But these actually increase the amount that our immune cells divide and keep calm and regulation. Without enough of this butyrate, we don't have that regulation, and the signals and messages going back and forth from bacteria to the immune system are very pro-inflammatory instead of anti-inflammatory, as they would be if we have enough of this butyrate. So without enough of the butyrate, without enough of the right bacteria to produce it, without enough of that prebiotic fiber in the diet, we get inflammation. And so that's sort of the pathway it's sort of like a 3 to 4 step kind of indirect pathway. But to that point, diet is really critical. A lot of people's problems can be solved by hydrating properly and just eating enough plants. I come from a weightlifting and strength training background, and we all like to make jokes about we're meat eaters and let's just eat bacon. I mean, I was involved in the CrossFit community for years, and it was bacon everything, and that's cute. But let's not be like 5-year-old asshole adults where we don't eat our vegetables. I mean, that's kind of the message that I think we all need to embrace, is that you can eat a plant-based diet without being a vegetarian or vegan. And if you want to be a vegetarian or vegan, there's nothing wrong with that. But if you're one of those people that's like, oh, meat, it's so great, and I'm a man and I eat meat, and it's, you know what I mean? There's always
I do know what you mean. There is a certain stigma out there. And actually, the thing that's really funny, and I find not funny, I find it actually somewhat alarming, is that there's this carnivore diet type of fad that's been bouncing around. And a lot of the different podcasts and speakers and reading has been buzz with carnivore, where it's literally they're eating meat and nothing else. And I'm thinking, how can that possibly be healthy in the long term?
So you hit it on the head. In the long term, it is not. So, oh man, I mean, I could go on and on about diet patterns, longitudinal studies, epidemiological stuff. But in the short term, people lose body fat or they gain muscle or whatever they claim, so it must be good for them. Okay, fine, whatever. But we actually have plenty of studies now that show in humans that when you cut out certain groups of plant fiber, you lose certain bacterial abundance. And those bacteria are kind of critical to your intestinal microbiome. And especially if you are somebody who has some risk for that imbalance, like you have not had the right diversity throughout life and you've taken a lot of antibiotics, things can quickly go downhill. I'll use the paleo diet as an example. Not to knock paleo, I used to be paleo, and they've shown that when you cut out grains and legumes, you lose bifidobacteria and several other really critical keystone species in enough abundance that it actually starts to impact health. So whereas people initially feel better, they lose some body fat because they're eating less processed food, their calories are lower, right? Their joint pain goes away, they sleep better. I mean, I'm not saying it's a bad diet, but what they find long term is that they really do lose that microbiome stability and diversity. And so long term, it's not that, I won't say it's bad for you long term, it's not that diverse. And you need plants. So my husband and I always say, eat like a vegetarian who eats meat.
Interesting statement.
You kind of have to approach diet like that. Like, come on, none of us are kids anymore. We can't sit there and be like, I don't want to eat it. You've got to eat vegetables. Like, that's you just have to.
No, absolutely. It's interesting because I think, the CrossFit paleo primal thing, extremely sexy type of I don't want to say advertising and marketing campaign, but it's very appealing, and you can't get this immediate blitz of positive momentum. But I think if you've been listening and reading on some of the original sources, you're seeing a lot more people, saying, well, you have to add in these different types of carbohydrates, these different type of sources of other alternative foods, and you're seeing this evolution where it's, maybe for a point in time to kind of kickstart something or kind of almost with a quote unquote fast mentality. Not that you're not eating, but you're focusing a certain way for a certain period of time.
Well, and those diets, I've been in the game long enough. I've worked with so many different athletes from so many different sports, and those diets tend to attract the type of person that's like all in, and they want to do the hardest thing possible. Partially because it's their personality, like they're an extreme type A, and moderation and balance is not something they embrace anywhere in their life, right? Like it's got to be all out, balls to the wall, absolutely 100% miserable all the time kind of diet, like Spartan diet. I don't know if you've ever seen that one. It's just they want those types of things because it makes them feel like they're more committed. And not knocking it, because some people thrive on those diets, and that's okay. But the majority of America, the 66% or more of us that are overweight or obese, do not follow those diets and cannot long-term. They're not viable. We need something a little bit more reasonable. So, when we're talking to the average Joe, or maybe just the athlete who's sort of just a hobbyist, right? Like my husband and I own a barbell club in Kansas City, and I would say the majority of our members are working class. They are people with families. None of them are going to go compete at a high level. Not that they couldn't, it's just that's not their agenda. And they just want to look good and feel good. So those are the people that need, okay, what can I do because I have a life, right? Like I don't live in the gym, I don't live in the kitchen. And that's sort of that approach of eat like a vegetarian who eats meat, like eat lots and lots of plants. And eat some meat too if you want to eat meat, but like you've got to eat plants.
Absolutely. It's funny because I think out of all the different types of trendy name brand diets, we mentioned a few and there's a ton more, the thing that I found the most interesting about them is as you look through them, you're generally seeing some elements of common themes or these threads that go through them. And then to me, those are the elements of truth that seem to be, I don't want to say universal, but pretty close to the closest thing we can come to a universal truth. Eliminating the processed foods, eating more holistically in terms of that approach, a natural approach versus, something out of a can or a box.
Right. And honestly, I would say that in the time that I've done this for years now, the people that have the best approach and the best mindset and the best long-term success are the ones that they understand calories and they understand macro portions and things like that, but they don't have to live by it because they can go, okay, I'm going to eat 85% of my food in its whole form, even if it's cooked, that's fine, but I'm not going to eat it out of packages, and then I'm going to occasionally have a cheat meal because that's healthy, as long as you're not cutting for something that's got to be like an exact weight class or something like that right now. The majority of us can stand to have a cheat meal from time to time. We can still enjoy food that we like, but we have this very healthy and balanced mindset and approach to it of not freaking out and obsessing over it, right? And that's pretty important. But to that point, those common threads of stop eating so much processed food, eat more real food. You eat way fewer calories when you do that. Subconsciously, you don't realize how much less you're snacking and how much less junk you eat when you avoid like the donuts in the break room and drinks every night with friends. Those type of things, those add up, and they're also not good for our gut when we look at it from a standpoint of the amount of fiber that we take in and our lifestyle patterns. There's if you want to read a really fantastic book, if you're into like longevity and anti-aging, I always throw this out as a book recommendation called The Blue Zones. I don't know if you've heard of that one.
I have heard of that one, yes.
I strongly recommend reading it. It's basically, they look at centenarians. Centenarians are your people that live to 100 or beyond, and they're functional. They're very, very functional 100-plus-year-old people. They're not, in a hospital bed dying. And they look at these pockets of centenarians, so these are blue zones throughout the world. Why do we have so many people who live to extremely old age in these particular areas? And they catalog everything about this people and the society there, their lives, from the minute they wake up to the minute they go to bed. What do they do? How do they think? What do they eat? How do they exercise? Everything about them, societal, cultural, economic, demographics. And there's common threads. And so the really cool, interesting thing is the common threads in all of those societies of people who live very long, fruitful lives. One of them is they eat a lot of plants. So some of them are borderline vegetarian societies. Others are not. Others eat plenty of meat. But they eat a lot of plants and fiber. So that's one of the things. So prebiotics, digestive health, etc. And, some of them drink a lot of wine. Others don't drink any. Some of them, and I would say another common thread is that they move. And some of them are hiking up mountains because they tend to flocks of sheep. Others are walking between their village and the next village to go get water. They don't have this 2-hour commute in their car and then sit at a desk and then 2-hour commute back home and then sit in front of the TV while you eat dinner. They're moving, they're constantly doing things, and there's that whole concept of NEAT, right? Your non-exercise activity thermogenesis. Their step count, they put Fitbits on these people. I'm sure it would be in the 50 to 70,000 a day. So to that point, Americans are pretty terrible at living a long life without the help of medicine and medical intervention, because we just don't take care of ourselves. We're not, our bodies are just in hell.
Yeah. It's a product of the environment, right? It's a product of everything you just described. We're basically immobile, for lack of a better term. And then the diet, which, pulling back to gut health, when you're putting garbage in, your gut is going to be operating in a state of distress.
Yep.
And
absolutely.
And go ahead.
Oh, no, I was going to say, you can do it for a while. I have a teenager, he's getting ready to turn 15, and left to his own devices, he will literally eat Doritos and Pop-Tarts for days. If I didn't intervene and make him a breakfast smoothie or make dinner, and things like that, he would eat that. And the kid is just lean and incredibly fit. But I know that that's not gonna, as soon as he hits 21 and he starts drinking, it's all gonna go away. But you can, when you're younger, I would say in my 20s, I could do that stuff and not pay the price for it because I was so young and my body was still in that regenerative phase.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of it having to do with, I didn't have a lot of microbiome imbalances at the time. I hadn't had any chronic health problems. I wasn't taking a bunch of antibiotics yet. And then towards the end of my 20s and into my 30s, life hits, right? You get stressed, you get sick, you have to take medicine. There's all these things happen. You fall apart. And you can't do that anymore. You basically start to die. But there are people who seem to, they have that iron gut, right? We all know that person that they can eat anything, right? And it doesn't affect them, or they claim that it doesn't. I don't know. We're not there in the bathroom with them.
Yeah. Well, I think sometimes we've probably followed that person in the bathroom.
We might have. And maybe based on the smell, maybe their gut's not as iron as they claim that it is. But I guess to that point, we do all have these completely different microbiomes, and we have to account for that when there's always that person that's I don't need to avoid gluten because I can eat it all day long and it doesn't make me sick. But then there are people who do, and people who eat little to no fiber and they seem to be okay. Like I said, I'm not there in the bathroom with them, but and then people who, if they don't eat 40 to 50 grams of it a day, cannot go normally. So.
Well, I think you hit it before. It's you're not in the bathroom with them, but they don't know. There's probably this misconception of what normal is. Like you were saying, a couple of times, you should be pooping a couple of times a day, and it should be easy. You shouldn't be in there straining. And I heard some, I forget which show I was listening to or whatever, but they were talking about it, and you shouldn't be in there for an hour either.
Oh, well, and that's a really good point. And I usually try to mention this, so there's what we have as we call, or I call a relative normal. So when I talk to patients occasionally, somebody will say, yeah, I probably have a bowel movement about once a week. And I'm like, oh my gosh, like just thinking in my head how miserable that has got to be to only poop once a week. But believe it or not, some of these individuals have been that way for so long that that's what they consider normal. Mm-hmm. And what I had asked them before that was, do you consider your bowel movements normal? Yeah, I do. Okay, well, how often do you go? I go about once a week. Really? Well, my doctor said that that's okay. And they don't ask questions. Like, there's nothing wrong with that because the doctor said it was okay. And because they've been that way for so long, nothing's wrong. So and that's exactly your point there. When somebody says, I can eat anything I want, or, that doesn't seem to bother me, I have no idea what they consider normal. And perhaps what they consider normal is completely abnormal and they have no idea.
Yeah, that's and the thing that gets really interesting is, so you combine the fact that and I'm painting with broad brushes here, but that's okay, or broad strokes. We think that eating the way that we're eating in American society, the processed foods, the very sedentary lifestyle, that's just normal. That's just how life is now. And I've got, maybe I would feel a little bloated. Oh, I could just pop a couple of these probiotics, go buy some pills, and everything will be fine. Where, really getting back to the space of everything that happens surrounding that is what's dictating it. Not saying that there isn't a need for probiotics or prebiotics, but I think some of the greater good is stepping back and looking at the holistic picture. Why do you think you need it? And then looking at everything else from the activity that, how mobile are you throughout the day? And then, of course, diet is a huge portion of it.
Well, and then this is another soapbox of mine, but, supplements are necessary in some cases to get people back on track, and I will definitely use them in my practice as a kind of temporary solution to help somebody manage something until we can get things healed and back to normalcy, or as normal as that person's going to be. But we definitely in America or in Western society, we have this mentality of there's got to be a pill for this. And rather than move more and drink more water and eat more plants and go to bed on time and just treat your body like it is the actual only body that you have, we're just like, well, I could just take a probiotic, it'll help that, and I can just continue to do these things that are terrible. The problem is that I see people in all stages of this, right? I've worked with anywhere from infants to people, in their late 70s, early 80s who are basically hospice, right? Mm-hmm. And I see every single stage of this where these people tried to just cover it up with medications, pills, or supplements earlier in life, and they're now at this point where those no longer work, and all of the bad choices and all of the junk and all the garbage they put in, right, is now, it's time to pay the taxes, essentially, right? Like death's knocking on your door. And I don't mean to be morbid, but there is only so long that those things work. And humans have evolved not as fast as the society and all of the junk and the crap and the stuff that we do to ourselves has evolved. Our bodies have not caught up to the stressors and the lack of sleep and the constant connectedness and all of the things that we're doing, right? Our terrible diet and our lack of movement. Our bodies have not come up with a way to adapt to that yet, other than to just fall apart. That's our adaptation, is like, oh crap. I think it's obviously not everybody has the ability to like quit their job and just go hike every day, right? Like that's not the solution. And for the majority of us, that's not the answer. But for the majority of us, I think that there are small things we could be doing. Again, like eating more plants and moving more and drinking more water and sleeping better. Those things go so far to solving some of these symptoms people have, that maybe the probiotic temporarily makes you feel a little bit better, but it's not going to work forever. And that's just sort of what the reality that we have to face.
I think one of the ones that's real, it's when you say soapbox, believe me, I've done a couple of shows in the past with some guests, and we really jumped into the supplement piece. And like my personal opinion is supplement, I mean, just the term itself, it's in addition to, it's not your primary source. And
absolutely.
When you were talking about water, that's a huge one. It would be hilarious to see somebody baseline, when they're saying, I've got these issues, and with my stomach, I'm bloated, whatever. How much water do you drink on a daily basis? Like every single day, how many glasses of water are you drinking? Because I would be willing to bet that more people than not they're just not drinking enough water.
Oh, it's I can tell you just with the small, over the last 100 patients that I've worked with, I would say that the average, and I've actually looked at this before because this is definitely a pain point of mine for people, is it comes out to be about 1 to 1.5 bottles of water equivalent throughout the whole day. So one bottle is about 16.9 ounces, so it's let's call it 17 ounces.
Yep.
That's 2 8-ounce glasses of water, just over 2 8-ounce glasses of water per day, right? We need a minimum of 80 to 100 ounces to really feel good, right? For our skin to look younger and healthier, for our kidneys to flush out all the crap that we're eating, and I don't want to go into I know it's going to sound woo when I use the term detox, but detox is what our liver and kidneys do, right? Mm-hmm. Those are our detox organs. And in order to flush out all of the crap that you want your body to detox, all the alcohol you drink and all of the, whatever else comes in with your food that we should normally be able to handle, if you're not drinking enough water, you do not have enough capacity to flush a lot of that out. Some of it does start to hang around over time. Sweating, if you work out or exercise or you do some other form of fitness where you're sweating, you need to sweat. Sweat is also a detox mechanism, by the way. It's one of the ways in which your body purges something that it cannot get out through the kidneys or through the bowels. So water is sort of that essential, and plus it's what your blood's made of, it's your cerebrospinal fluid. I mean, all these things that water does in your body, it's critical for that. And if you're drinking 1 to 1.5 bottles of water when you should be drinking, roughly 5 to 6, think about where that puts you. And there's all these people that do these 30-day water challenges, right, where they just drink close to a gallon of water a day for 30 days and they don't change anything else. And they're like, oh my God, my life has changed. Well, duh.
Yes, I don't think you could have put that any better. I mean, really, it gets back to that new normal thing. You get used to operating in the sense where I have a couple glasses of water a day. My skin's always itchy. I'm always very tired, so I have to have more caffeine. I poop once a week. That's normal. Where it's like I've accepted to live this way instead of actually kind of understanding how well I could live just simply by doing a couple of things differently.
Oh, and the thing is people just don't know how good they can feel until they feel that good. And this is the same thing as weight loss. I think why a lot of people who are very overweight or obese, who have been that way, since childhood perhaps, who haven't known anything else, it's very difficult for them to understand when somebody who's thin or fit or whatever, not overweight, is like, oh well, yeah, just lose weight, it's great, and it's sort of this condescending thing that we say to people who are overweight and obese. They have no frame of reference for what it feels like to not be overweight or obese. So to them, they don't know everything that they feel that is not normal isn't normal. Yep. If that makes sense. And so they don't know that they could feel so phenomenally better. And I know it sounds condescending to say that, but to that point, that it's their normal. So how do you get that across to somebody that doesn't understand it or doesn't know what it feels like? And that's exactly it. Is we're all kind of walking around with oh yeah, well, this hurts, that hurts, that's normal. And then it does not help that we go to the doctor and the doctor's like, oh, you're just getting old. Yeah. Well, I'm 36. What do you mean?
Absolutely. It's funny because you had mentioned the blue zones and centurions, and it's not just the fact of how long you can live. I think it's what the quality of your life is as you age, and having kids I think is the ultimate driver personally. Anyway, I have young kids, and I want to be as active as long as possible with them, not to the point of going, well, I'm just old, so I can't go run around and play with them. That to me, that's just to me, it is a defeatist attitude.
Oh yeah, and I think a lot of parents give up on that. They push their kids to do sports, but they themselves don't. They don't hold themselves to the same standard that they hold their kids to. They live through their kids. Yet their kids are sitting there watching them. They watch, but I don't think adults realize how much children watch us, and they learn our habits, and they do what we do because they see us do it. And if you sit on your ass during your kids' sports practice or game or whatever it is, and then every single thing, all the time they see you just sitting down, watching TV, sitting down, doing this, your kid is more likely to do those things. Like, we've studied this happens. So as an adult, it's kind of us. Like, it's on us. It's our responsibility to change that. And I'm hoping that, I know the baby boomers are kind of already on their way out, but maybe like the Gen Xers and the millennials and the Generation Y and whatever the hell else we're calling, I don't know what everyone else's generation is, but like maybe these could be the generations that are like, okay, yeah, we're going to move more. Maybe we're going to beat this overweight and obesity thing. But who knows,
Well, I certainly hope so. That's part of the reason why I do this. Personally, I love talking to great people, like-minded people like yourself, and I want to learn as much as I can so I can, again, selfishly, have the most fulfilling life possible with my family. But I also want to help others. I think that's the ultimate piece. And it's funny, when we start talking with people like yourself, the like-minded individuals, it seems as though there's this karmic type of an approach where, you've been very generous with your time today, and it's for a good cause, something you believe in. And others in this same circle that we're in are also very generous and wanting to help others as well, which I think is steps in the right direction toward that battle of getting people to be more mobile, to be more healthy longer.
Yeah, I agree. I think it takes a village, that saying.
Yes, one of my favorites.
We all have to do it together. There's not one diet, there's not one supplement, there's not one form of exercise. It's like people just kind of need to encourage. I have a few friends that we encourage each other, right? I'll text them what I'm eating, or we'll talk about how we worked out, and we sort of just keep it on the forefront of each other's notice that this is healthy, this is the normal, we're going to be accountable to each other. And I think that's, we all kind of need that. We need to have that person in our life that is who we want to be like versus those people in our life that drag us down and don't want to change. The whole, you're most like the 5 people you spend the most time with. That's incredibly true.
Yeah, fantastic. Sarah, thank you so much for spending some time talking to us about, well, lots of things. And I got to tell you, we definitely went down a path, a couple of times. I did not expect to talk about vaginal birth versus C-section, but that was very educational for me.
Well, thanks. It's got to be mentioned. If we're talking about the microbiome, we kind of have to go there. But yeah.
So you had mentioned you've got a barbell club. You're out in Kansas City. Do you want to talk about it? You can give the address if any of the listeners are out there, and you can plug any of your social media.
Yeah, absolutely. So Kansas City Barbell is the barbell club. I kind of just coach one class. I don't really want to be super involved. I've kind of done the gym thing before, and I'd like to be more, in the background on this one. My husband and his business partner, Sean Dunstan, they are the meat and potatoes. And my husband, Jay, between him and Sean, they have, 30, 40 plus years of experience in weightlifting of all varieties, whether it's Olympic lifting, powerlifting, strongman, rugby, training for sports. It's kind of everything. They train youth through adults. So they're located in the Crossroads district of Kansas City. And you can go to, I think it is kansascitybarbell.com. If it's not that, it's KC Barbell, and I apologize for not knowing the exact website. We're also on Facebook and social media. My husband and I run a Facebook group. If you're into any of the stuff that I've talked about, and you're a quirky individual, and you like to have great discussion, and you can be professional and respectful with discussion without devolving into insults online, we have a group called Pump, Dump, and Hump on Facebook, and it's basically all 3 of those things. Pump, we love working out, lifting weights, etc. But it's not just for weightlifting, obviously. It's whatever kind of fitness you like. Dump, meaning better poops, and hump, having better sex, or discussing relationships, sexuality, etc. So it's sort of that whole person concept. It's just a Facebook group, so there's nothing, you don't have to do anything to join. Just request to join. There's questions to answer. We want to make sure that people joining the group want to be there, and they can participate and be respectful without being assholes. It's essentially what it's about. But that's fun. We have a really good time in there. I do have a website. It is not up at the moment. I'm actually, maybe by the time this airs, it'll be up, but it's sarahashmanrd.com. I'm doing some work on my website. It'll probably be up in the next, 3 to 5 days, I hope. I'm trying to think of anything else. Those probably the main ways to reach me, as far as online or in person.
All right, awesome. Pump, dump, and hump. I don't know anybody who could actually argue with that.
Well,
That's
I mean,
pretty
those
straightforward.
are like the 3 things you need in life, kind of like to be a happy person, in my opinion.
There you go. There you go. I love it. Thank you so much, Sarah, for joining us today.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thanks for having me on.